It's the offseason, and the Golden State Warriors have a lot of questions, especially when it comes to the salary cap. So I thought, let's bring on an expert. Eric Pincus joins me next. This is Locked On Warriors.
You are Locked On Warriors, your daily Golden State Warriors podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Warriors your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can follow Eric Pincus. He's an instructor of the sports business class. Registration is open. You can follow the sports business class on Twitter at sportsbiz with a Z class. Eric also writes for Bleacher Report, and you can follow him on Twitter at Eric Pincus. Super easy. And you can follow me, Cyrus Saatsaz, on Twitter at Dog Surf Roadshow. Not quite as easy. Eric, it's absolutely a pleasure to have you on the show. How are you doing this morning, sir? And I guess first question to ask you, in your opinion, what do the Warriors need to do this offseason in order to be championship contenders next year, if that's a possibility? Great to see you, sir.
Ooh. Okay, so just like the whole thing, like, in 5 seconds.
No. We'll break it down. It's a hard to. I guess first.
I'm like,
what are you doing this morning? Let's start
let's
there. How are
see.
you?
In one sentence or one concept. Oof. Yikes. Pray. I don't know if there's I mean, to the extreme you said, guarantee you're back at the championship level. Yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one.
It is. Well, let's start here. You're a cap expert. I'm so stoked you came on because the NBA just signed a new collective bargaining agreement. Not necessarily favorable for teams like the Warriors who are over the cap. I looked at the cap figures, and it looks like right now the team is at approximately, including luxury tax penalties. And I'm getting this from Spot Track, so tell me if they're completely wrong. But what I'm getting right now is that the Warriors are at approximately $440 million between salary and cap. That's without filling all the necessary roster spots. So they're probably going to get 2 to 3 more veteran minimum contracts added to this. They have a draft pick, number 19, which we don't even know what the GM situation is right now. So we have no idea if they're going to trade that, if they're going to use it. But what I've heard is that right now, if they just keep things the way they are, and they go with a couple of veteran minimum deals, they add the number 19 pick. We're looking at $490 million next year, approximately. And obviously, you correct me if I'm wrong on that. I've heard Joe Lacob say that they don't want to ever go above $400 million. Am I correct on everything I said there? Anything to add to that, sir?
I mean, I have, numbers in that range. It's not exactly what I have, but it's close. And
Okay.
So they're all projections. But yeah, like if they're looking at, I don't know, it depends who they keep, depends on a few little, an option for Dante DiVincenzo. Does he opt in? Does he opt out? Some of the things they don't control. But you are looking at a massive, massive price, which was always the case for the Warriors last year.
Right.
This one is the most extreme because the rules in the short term are tougher, and then in the medium and long term are tougher. Like, so this is the lightest year and of restriction and punishment and whatnot. But yeah, they're in a very committed, they're a pot committed team. This is not like the Rockets, who could basically get out of almost anybody they have. You have, as the Warriors, a lot to sort through. Basically, if your owner is willing to pay, but it sounds like Bob Myers is not necessarily sticking around. I don't know.
Nobody knows
he's
yet.
not. I mean, I'm hearing he's gonna take a year off from this industry, and I don't know that that's fact, but that's what I hear, is that it's probably he's going to step away and take a year off. Don't be aggregating all that. That's just like
fair.
That's the buzz in
that's
the
not what your
neighborhood,
sources are telling you. But again, I always feel like there's 2 levels of sourcing. There's sourcing that's legitimate, you're reporting it, and then there's stuff you hear that could lead to something. Like,
Right.
Which level of sourcing are we at with the Bob
Well,
Myers?
I mean, I haven't talked to Bob Myers, his people, or the Warriors directly on this, so I can't like write and say this. But I've talked to tons and tons of people in the industry, other executives, agents, whoever you can think of. I typically try to talk to, and so the buzz is he's not going to be back. He'll take a year off, but that's just what other teams think about what's going to happen. It doesn't necessarily mean what is going to happen, but they also have sources too. So, take it as it is.
Yeah, and Bob Myers, I tweeted this yesterday that he had a scheduled exit interview for this week. Exit interviews are normally done last week when the season ended. He postponed it because he was at the draft combine. And the fact that he went to the draft combine tells me at least, okay, he's not for sure quitting, because otherwise what's the point of going to that? But then he delayed his exit interview again this week to next week. No reason given for that. So stay tuned, Dub Nation. We're recording this on May 25th. But Eric, I'm hearing the same things too, that his family has been a major priority. He might be experiencing some burnout. But I've been saying for a long time, Dub Nation and the Warriors are going to suffer if he leaves. I hope that's not the case. But regardless, I guess one question I have, because if it's true that the Warriors are going to try to keep this salary situation at the $400 million mark, and I read an article you recently wrote about Jordan Poole about why the Warriors even gave him that deal next year. I feel like they were hamstrung a little bit when the Draymond Green punch happened, which kind of makes me wonder. When you talk about that leak a year ago, and you think, okay, when certain actions occur, usually a financial motive is at play, and look, that leak helped Jordan Poole, because that was largely the catalyst for the Warriors giving him that deal last year, not this offseason, like you alluded to in your recent piece on Bleacher Report. But regardless, if the Warriors are going to get to $400 million, Jordan Poole is going to have to be traded for nothing. And the only thing I could think of is a trade exception. I'm looking at a player like Gary Payne II. You probably have to get him off the books. He's making a little over $9 million, I believe, next year. So with the new CBA, can the Warriors get those contracts off their books for trade exceptions if they trade those two to a team like the Spurs, like the Rockets, who are under the cap? Is a trade exception still allowed in the CBA? And do you think that's a realistic course if the Warriors want to keep their core three, despite the fact they're aging, but still maintain that $400 million mark? Your thoughts?
Well, they have quite a few things to think about, because, like, for one, the new deal is not favorable. It was almost, I want to say almost, it was geared towards the Warriors, the Clippers, and a few other teams that are toes on, even the Bucks, like I can think of a few other teams that are at this point. Yeah. Well, the Clippers and the Warriors are the top two.
Right.
And they did go after those two teams, but they also will impact teams like the Pelicans, who are a small market team, who have a bunch of players they want to pay and keep and grow. They're not going to be able to afford to. So Warriors fans, I don't even think, I mean, it hurts if they stay here and it makes it harder. But eventually they're going to get out of this financial situation, and it's just the natural course of things. So, but there are other teams that are in almost disadvantage. Like the Warriors already have some really incredible players, and they're already spending however much. So if it's just more money, it's more money. As far as like basketball restrictions, those kind of phase in over time and then impact the team long term. So there's a lot that they need to kind of prioritize. Yeah, when you talk about how, if you want to trade a player away, you could always trade a player away and take nothing back. And if you got a trade exception, the question is would you be able to use it? And the answer is kind of like, yes, if there's a trade over the summer, and then yes, if there's a trade through the deadline. Okay. So if you made a trade on the day before the deadline, you have a trade exception, maybe use the next day. But if you get a trade exception at the deadline, and now the deadline is passed, and now you're into the next offseason, now you can't use that trade exception if you're in that second apron territory, which of course is our point as far as where the Warriors at least project to be for some time.
So how could the Warriors get away from that Jordan Poole deal? Like, can they? I mean, are they still? You just mentioned that they could trade him away for nothing, but don't the salaries have to match like wherever he trades them to, or no?
No, I mean it's all dependent on situation. For one, you could trade to a team that is under the cap that can just absorb him entirely, and so it's one of those things. I don't know that they want to just dump Jordan Poole and just cut that money. You're sort of making an assumption that they have to decide, is what happened in the playoffs situational? Is this a guy who can be and should be part of our core for the next however many years? I think when they signed the extension, I think they thought he's maybe the next Steph or something, and they were getting him at a discount, right? Whereas I think if you take into account what the market has to offer, you could say that they overpaid, and certainly he could have had an even a better, incredible offseason or something like that. I guess he's already paid, so we have to go back to last year. So he did what he did, right? He did take a step, I think, into the regular season. So he was very good regular season last year. They win a championship, improved his regular season play, and still kind of didn't pan out in the postseason. So, but again, they may love the contract. I don't want to say that they want to get rid of it, but if you say they've got to get down to a certain number, there's only so many contracts they can get rid of. It's
right.
Looney is such a valuable part of what they do, and Draymond really is. So I think that's probably in a lot of ways the fulcrum question. What happens with Draymond? That kind of sets up what else happens, because if he opts out and they keep him long term, that tells you what their budget is long term.
Right.
If he opts in, and maybe this is just like one last dance kind of thing, or does he sign with another team? And that's possible too. So he could get up and leave. I don't think he'll get that kind of money. I think, from a Draymond's point of view, if you're Draymond and his agent, you're probably thinking, without breaking the rules. Well, actually, most agents and teams do break the rules. And so let's not, and really, I don't even think it's breaking the rules on the agent side. It's more breaking of a rule on the team side to have that kind of contact.
Right.
Not that agents are supposed to do that either, but
right. But it happens.
So
we're being realistic. Yeah.
I'd be finding out exactly what the market is. Is there, you could say, no contender, or the money doesn't, but maybe it's something like the Pistons, who, I'm not saying this happens, I'm making this up, but the Pistons are like, okay, he went to school here. We have all these young guys who we think are ready to take another step, and we want to get a guy who can show them, not that they'll be a championship team, but they'll make a leap. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it could be that if you're Draymond Green, you're talking to other teams and finding that out. Maybe there's a team that's like, yeah, we absolutely want you. Then you're opting out. But if he can't have that security, and if the Warriors aren't giving him what he wants long term, then it's maybe just opt in. So really curious, but where that money goes, and I think how long, if they reinvest in Draymond, that kind of tells you, do they line him up with Wiggins, line him up with Curry, I guess. So, is it 2 more years? Is it 3 more years? Where's the, that tells you, okay, they're going to try to be this Warriors team for X amount of years longer. And if they don't, and Draymond's gone or is just in his last year, then it feels more like a last dance.
Yeah. And Draymond has said publicly, this was through Mark Spears of ESPN, that if Bob Myers goes, he goes. Now, who knows if he sticks to that, right? But they have a very close relationship. So that part is curious. When we come back, I have a question for you. I'm going to tee this up for you. You'll have a couple minutes to contemplate the answer. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that the Warriors maintain their stance, that they want to stick to $400 million. They don't want to go over that for their annual payroll. Look, that's an astronomical figure. And the way that things are going now, if they keep everyone and Draymond either opts in or they give him an extension where he's making close to what he's making, what he's scheduled to make, which is about $27 million next year. Again, we're looking at a payroll that's nearly $500 million next year. So when we come back, Eric, I'm curious to know if, let's say, you take over as GM of the Warriors and Lacob's first directive is, we need $90 million lopped off this payroll for next year. How do they do that? That's the main reason why I keep bringing up Jordan Poole, is because I don't know how else they do that, unless you're right, unless Draymond Green doesn't come back, which is a sad possibility. So that's the question I pose to Eric when we come back. I got to give some love first to eBay Motors. And again, for a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. The Warriors are certainly facing that question right now. It's an existential crisis, but it's the same when it comes to your vehicle, right? Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and then look for the green check to make sure that the part will fit. And if it doesn't, you get your money back. That's called the guarantee, folks, because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Motors Fit, eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
You are Locked On Warriors, your daily Golden State Warriors podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Warriors your first listen every day. Every dayers tomorrow on the show, Kylan Mills comes back, and we're going to start introducing potential free agents that the Warriors could add this offseason. There's a lot of players available out there, and that's what we're going to be covering. Eric Pincus joins me right now, though. You can follow Eric on Twitter at Eric Pincus. He's an instructor of the sports business class, which is accepting registration right now, accepting new students. Registration is open. Eric, you also write for Bleacher Report, and we go back to the question posed. Let's say you're the GM, and Lacob comes to you and says, "We got to lop some contracts out of there. We got to rework things. We got to figure this out to get our payroll down to $400 million." What do you do?
Well, I mean, the first question is it still Steph, Klay, Draymond? Because that's really the heart of the throwback championship era with some Wiggins thrown in, right? Assuming that you're keeping Wiggins too, who is such a valuable part.
Yeah.
Hard to see you get out of Looney either if you're the Warriors. So,
correct.
It's like, well, you need to know if DiVincenzo opts in, but really everyone, like guys like Moody, Baldwin, Rollins don't make a significant amount relative to solving this issue. So maybe Kuminga, maybe, I mean, you don't want to get rid of your youth, but maybe there's a veteran, but you're still probably taking salary back anyway when you make deals.
Right.
And I guess Gary Payton II and one more I mean,
Well, there's Moses
really,
Moody
yeah.
is making about $4 million next year.
Yeah. I guess Poole is, sort of, I guess that decision point of like, are you still the Steph, Klay, Draymond, or are you whatever's next, which is a little bit more like what Kuminga will be, what Moody will be, what Poole will still be. And so then, that's really, I think, the fulcrum point. Are they, and it sounds like everybody wants to keep band together. It sounds like Bob Myers isn't necessarily a part of that. And then if that's, if Draymond's true to his word, then maybe he's just trying to apply pressure to Bob
Maybe.
to stay.
Maybe.
So
yeah.
And when it's time to actually get paid, I mean, you got to go where the money is and the situation is. So he could have like, yeah, I'm leaving, I'm out of here. And then they go and find that, oh, well, never mind. I got to come back because there's no more money. Like if
Right.
the Warriors are paying him more, and he's more valuable to the Warriors perhaps than anyone else could possibly get out of him at his age and what he does. Although there are situations where he would help teams 100%. In the Warriors, he's sort of the key to almost everything they do outside of what Steph is, and I guess what Klay is too. So,
Right.
If you have to lop off like $90 million, well, I mean, Poole's only half of that, but you get you there via you're dropping the tax, right?
Exactly.
The tax. So, and it's proportional. I haven't run like a Poole-less Warriors projection, but there are teams that, like, if you looked at, I don't know about the Rockets, I don't know about we can go, but we could Spurs,
Magic,
and
right?
Well, the Magic, yeah. I mean, I think they're going after Fred VanVleet, but let's say they don't get him,
Right.
they could try to get something like that. Certainly, even Detroit, they have guards, but you don't know who they're invested in and who what they plan on. It seems a stretch with Ivy and with Cade, but You just have to consider all the teams, Indiana, that have either the need, and certainly starting with the money. Do they have the money? The need is where we're sort of, questioning, but you just list out the teams with money, and they could just save the Warriors a ton of money. But at the same time, it would have to be enough, because if the Warriors are paying all that tax, that team is probably getting a kickback of that tax later. So but that might only be $3 or $4 million.
Right.
Like if they save the Warriors a certain number, they only save them, like it's 1/30th, or not even 1/30th, like let's say 1/20. It depends on the year. It's a tough formula to know. So, but let's say it was a 3 million, it costs a few $1 million. So, but if you're traded with the team and they pay you $3 or $4 or $5 million to make up for it, then you're willing to do it, and you're getting Poole, and maybe you like him, or maybe whatever. So, I'll say that there are. I think there would be a market. I don't know how good the market would be for Poole, but I think there's a market.
Yeah, I agree. And just for the sake of argument, because I always circle back to Poole, and also I'm looking at Gary Payne II maybe as well. I keep looking at them largely because, again, I really hope ownership bends and they go above the 400 million mark, because that's really the only way it sounds like they can keep the band together. But if they don't, if they're making a hard line here, in order to trade Poole, let's say hypothetically to the Spurs, a team that sounds like would be a good fit, right? Especially with Wemby. Maybe, they want a second potential star to pair up with them. They would have to get back a trade exception, correct? Because the way the salary cap works, you can't just trade someone for nothing, correct? I mean, how would that work out?
I'm not sure that's how I'd put it, but basically, if the Warriors traded Poole to the Spurs and got nothing back, a trade exception would be generated as part of that
Correct.
equation.
That's what I was trying to get to.
And
okay.
then they don't, that money doesn't count against any tax. It's just a flexible tool that you can use. However, the Warriors would only have a certain amount of time to use it up until this particular trade deadline, I believe. And I want to double check that when that rule kicks in. I think it might be after the next summer. Some of the rules are next summer, and some are the one after. So
gotcha.
I would want to,
And realistically, they probably wouldn't even use it. I mean, it'd be similar to when they traded Iguodala back in 2020 to make the whole sign and trade work for D'Angelo Russell to eventually get Wiggins. They got a trade exception back for that deal, never used it. I'm just trying to figure out like what. This is a very interesting offseason, and you use the word curious. I think a lot of people are very curious about what's going to happen. And again, I really hope the Warriors are willing to open the pocketbook a little more, because they got some tough decisions ahead of them. One tough decision, Eric, and again, you can follow Eric Pincus on Twitter at Eric Pincus. Registration is now open for the sports business class. And I'm going to ask you at the end of the show to describe that exactly, like what that entails. What are students getting out of it? But you can follow the sports business class on Twitter at sportsbizclass, biz with a Z. Klay Thompson, to me, is one of the many conundrums, and this is a player who is prideful. Steve Kerr won't even publicly even consider the possibility of moving to the bench, just because Klay his ego's. I mean, I don't know if ego is the right word, but his pride is that big where I don't think he wants to rattle Klay like that. And so anytime someone brings that up to Kerr publicly, Kerr just scoffs, immediately shuts the idea down. Even though Klay is clearly on the downside of his career, he's going to make approximately $43 million next year before he's an unrestricted free agent. In your opinion, and maybe you have sources to corroborate this, but what do you think the Warriors are going to do with Klay? Are they going to offer him an extension? What kind of dollar amount do you think that would entail? Your thoughts on Klay Thompson?
That's a tough one too. You kind of go to the fundamental equation that we're discussing. Like, are you Steph, Klay, and Draymond, and for how many years are you that? Come hell or high water, even if that destroys the franchise for X number of years after, that's the plan. At least the rules are so restrictive that it would be very difficult. Yeah, that might be fine for the Warriors. It's just you might have some drafts down the road where you were the worst team in the league and you have like the 28th pick or something like that, or the 29th pick, just because of, without getting into the mess of the nuances. What you're doing now is impacting 7 years down the road, and it can't be undone. Some of what we're describing. But again, there's Steph has 3 more years, so do you then extend Klay for 2 more and lock down Draymond for 3 total, including this year with the option? And you're probably trying to get them like someone like Klay at a lower number, saying, I mean, is he a $43 million player anymore? He's probably like a 17 million. He's kind of like should be making more than or about what Bogdanovich in Atlanta got, right? Like that's a
Yeah,
reasonable comp. I mean,
agreed.
the gravity of Klay, you could say fine, and the respect of the name, if you wanted to push it up to 23, 24, I get it. Like, but every million they go up, that's just locking in more and more penalty and long-term potential damage. So yeah, whether they keep Klay and Draymond, I have to think are partnered because they both end the same time after this year,
Right.
assuming that Draymond, if they don't pay Draymond and Draymond can't get money elsewhere. But the thing is like if Draymond had a team that was willing to pay him like 18 a year for 4 years,
Right.
he might be willing to do that because that's more money in total than his. Okay, if you're losing 10 million this year, fine, you lose 10 million this year, but you may not get another contract anywhere close. So I could see a world, and I don't know, that's just making something up. I haven't reached out to anybody on anything like that, but he would still need a team with cap room to pay him if it was like a 17 million, 18, 19 million dollar deal. So that still is limiting. The mid-level that some teams will be about 12 million. It's probably not enough to, like, if you got 3 years at 12, 36, that's not anywhere close to like making up for the 27 that you're
Right.
20,
Right.
27 and a half that you're getting rid of. So yeah, outside of that, it does tie, like, if you go and you invest in those 3, can you afford then this budget, which maybe you can, maybe you can't, or is it when you have to say, all right, where are you going to cut corners? Getting Klay back at the right number, getting Dre at the back at the right number would help, but that big number for Jordan Poole is a little bit of an eyesore if that's what they are for those next 3 years. If they're not, because I don't know if that's where the money needs to be. Regular season Jordan Poole is so valuable because it takes the burden and the pressure off of the top of Steph and Klay and whatnot.
I agree. Yeah.
He's a playoff liability at this point based on his size, ability to defend, and needing the ball in his hands a lot. And you're on a team with Steph and Klay and Draymond that's predicated on movement and is a beautiful offense, and they're not resting the same amount of time that they would rest in the regular season, right?
Right.
Like, they played 25 on a night where you're getting an easy win, great, but in the playoffs they're probably playing like 38-ish or something like that. I haven't looked, I don't know how many if he restricts Klay or anything like that just by requirement, but you get the point, certainly.
Yeah, no, I absolutely do. And I understand what you're saying, that the team, I think, ideally would like to get Klay and Dre back at team friendly deals to match up with Steph, so they all kind of finish up at the same time. I mean, that I could see that being the goal. So this wasn't planned, but Eric stayed with me for an entire hour. And the second half of the show is coming up next, but we talk less about the Warriors cap situation. I mean, I guess it's kind of a cap related discussion, but it's much more so about the ethics, the logic behind the NBA not penalizing teams for drafting effectively. And Dub Nation especially cares about this because, and I agree, it doesn't seem fair that the Warriors are being penalized through the salary cap and the penalties for drafting efficiently. Well, Eric added a new perspective to it. And look, a lot of this is philosophical. A lot of this is subjective, but he brings up, again, a new perspective, a new point, a new viewpoint to this that at least the Warriors fans should learn about, so that they have a better understanding as to why the NBA penalizes a team's draft pick when it comes to luxury tax penalties, the same way they would penalize a free agent acquisition. And it's a great discussion. Eric is the one who talks most of the time, just because, again, he brings a new viewpoint on this. So that is part 2 of my interview with Eric Pincus next.